Hello and welcome to Property Matters, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And you can find this weekly property show on our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk, or by searching Property Matters TV in either YouTube or Facebook. Whenever or wherever you're watching us, get involved in the conversation. We love to see your comments on a Sunday. And if you'd like to email us as well, it's hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. Property Matters is also available as a podcast. Every Monday, the same show is rebroadcast as a podcast at 10 o'clock on any one of those sites over on the right-hand side as you look at the screen. Take a look at the weekly news. Joe Joshi is with us, I'm pleased to say. Hi, Joe.
Yes, good morning, Paul. Good morning, everybody, and good morning to all of our listeners. Lots going on in the property world. And of course, the festive season has begun, but within the property world, I think it began a little bit earlier than we normally would do. But I'm not sure Santa has got lots of goodies at the moment, but you never know what the new year brings.
Well, indeed, and really what we're looking at first off today is what difference a month can make when you've got Liz Truss in charge. So this is the analysis of the month of November. And of course, we had the mini budget, which happened in quarter four, of course, and that was in late September, which led to a sharp reduction in housing market activity, more pronounced in new buyer demand than sales agreed. So basically, a lot of people just stepped back. It was those that still had to move and wanted to move or had a deal in place were still doing their business. But of course, those that were looking to maybe get on the ladder were obviously immediately spooked by the interest rates. Demand has fallen to levels normally associated with Christmas, as you rightly say, Joe, as new buyers sit on the sidelines, watching the outlook for mortgage rates and what the economic headwinds mean for jobs and incomes. New buyer demand is almost half the level a year ago when market conditions were stronger. But of course, at that time, we had the mortgage stamp duty relief, didn't we, as well? So deals were unusually high at that point and the market was right at the top of the value. Sales volumes decline less than buyer demand. New sales are still being agreed by those with mortgage offers and the motivation to move, but would-be first-time buyers facing steep rent rises also felt the need to get on the housing ladder. And that's interesting because I'm reading also elsewhere this week that landlords, and we'll see in our next story, that landlords are passing on anything up to 20% rent rises. So for some young people starting out, that might well be a motivation to get on the ladder despite everything, Joe.
Absolutely. And good to see the a monthly Zoopla there. And you can see it's been a stark difference in what it was even a month or so ago as to where we are. Yes, the property is still on the increase, which is a good thing. There is a good amount of supply now. I mean, a year ago, Paul, you may remember, we were struggling to get the number of instructions on because there was such a huge demand in property that there was just a small supply of what's new coming on. I recall discussing that agents were really securing maybe 2 or 3 instructions as opposed to what they are now securing at this moment in time. So, you know, quite clearly, it's a stark difference to what was happening a year ago. Nevertheless, I would say that it's still not a massive issue at this moment in time. There's a huge correction in the marketplace, brought on by a number of things that have happened, of course. And one of those is thanks to our lovely Liz Truss, who came in for about 30 days and completely changed our world, or should I say, demolished our world. In the world of property and in the world of confidence. Nevertheless, we are still here. Property will be here. It was here way before she came. It was here while she was here. And funny enough, it's going to be here way after she's now gone, thank God. You know, it's important. You know, property is something that everybody loves. They feel it, touch it, see it. They feel confident in it. And it will always be there. We have these blips every so often. I call them corrections. People in the media generally call them a price reduction, or as they say, house prices are going down. House prices are not going down. They are having a correction that was obviously slightly overdue, and certain circumstances have made that happen. And but there is still consumer demand in the purchase of property, and the reason why a lot of people have held back is because of the rates that went up. I mean, I know of clients whose rates went so high that basically it became beyond affordable. So subsequently, the mortgage offers were perhaps withdrawn, and their circumstances changed. But they will if they have the wish and the will and the want to get on, they will come back.
Yeah, as you can see on the screen there. So now your house price is growing by 7.8% per year as of November. That was well over 10%, of course, a year ago. And sales volumes are down by 28% across the UK. But in some areas like the southeast, the sales volumes are halved, according to this report. And 25% of homes with any size of asking price reduction since the 1st of September. So that's the number of homes where prices are being addressed by the two people in the transaction. And the suggestion is that the market is actually reducing prices, but not significantly. They say in this report that they don't really measure much beneath sort of 5%. And generally speaking, most of the reductions are around 5%, certainly no more than 10%. So it's interesting to see what the outcome is. Here's the executive summary. So mini budget fallout hits demand by 44%, with new sales down 28%. New sales fell by half in the hottest markets in the less affordable areas. Lower sales and new supply are boosting sales inventory, and that's a good thing to see. I think we have a graph on it here. Yes, here we are. Look at this. So demand declines. Now, when we've looked at this in the past years, Joe, the diagonal going upwards to the top right, it used to go from the top left down to the bottom right, and now you can see demand is down 47%. Number of sales agreed down 28%. New flow up 10%. We've not seen that for a long time. And stock of homes for sale 40%. So it's been a dramatic turnaround in the fact that although people want to move, they just physically can't afford to at the moment, can they?
No, and that graph is a complete reverse of what it was even a month ago, perhaps even, but certainly a year ago from when it was. It's a total reverse. It was the other way around, but yes, it has changed. But I still think that the demand is very good at this moment in time, and it's good to see that there is more stock now available, choices available. It's the affordability that has really caused a huge issue here at this moment in time. I think, if we put our hand on our heart, we've always known that interest rates were at some stage of its journey in its life going to go up. We knew that. It was amazingly low from 2007, 2008 financial crash right down to when things, where we are currently. But I think the double whammy in this whole situation has been the utility costs, the gas, electric rates, etc., which have all come in at the same time, and so that's the double whammy that's causing affordability and causing the marketplace to sort of sit back and rethink. The adjusting of the interest rate, I think, is kind of expected, and I still feel that we're probably going to settle at something like 4 or 5% in the long term as there's a base rate, because it was amazingly low. So I suppose the one good thing that Liz Truss did do for the bank is to whack up the interest rate in a fast track, as opposed to them perhaps doing that in the next 2 to 3 years. They've actually done it in 2 to 3 days rather than that. So I'm sure they're very grateful for her being in that situation. But the rest of us are finding it really hard in our pockets, and especially at this given time of the year, that is a driving factor for everybody.
Yeah, the average number of properties registered at estate agency offices is at 23. So each branch has 23 homes for sale. This is the highest it's been since January 2021, but almost a fifth lower than pre-pandemic levels. The trend is recorded across the whole of the UK very similarly. Rebuilding the sales inventory, which boosts buyer choice, is part of a move to a more balanced market, they say. However, it's important that these homes are priced in line with what buyers are prepared to pay, given the hit to buying power. So that's a very interesting point, isn't it? It has become a buyer's market very, very quickly. I mean, these figures on this graph here transformed in just 4 weeks to the 20th of November, it says there.
Yeah, absolutely. It is definitely a buyer's market. and look at that graph. It's just, though I normally don't like your graphs because, I know you enjoy them, but it's it's a clear demonstration of what's happened in a month, in terms of the values, and in terms of the demand and the supply. The supply has become far more available. Demand is obviously slightly lower, and partly that is seasonal, I have to say, and partly because of where the economy is, and where the purse strings are right across the board. That's not to say that that will be there. We've been there before, ladies and gentlemen. Throughout the last, God knows, 40 odd years, it's been up and down, as they say. But certainly, I hope to see that turn back upwards, probably in the early part of 23. Currently, you'll see it will stay there primarily because seasonally, we are in that seasonal mode, December, January, and probably start to see that things will start to turn back in the other direction. I know I am forever positive about these things, but trust me, I think it's a short-lived scenario, because at the end of the day, people want to crack on with this.
Yeah, it's interesting that they say this is a shakeout more than a precursor to a housing crash. They're saying that the more homes for sale will reduce the scale of upward pressure on the prices. They don't expect there'll be an oversupply anytime in 2023. They expect some element of scarcity to remain a feature of the market, limiting the downsides for pricing levels in 2023. So they don't see prices massively falling off a cliff because there's a huge wash of new houses for sale and no one to buy them. But they do think there's going to be obviously a lot less demand because of the affordability issues. Interesting that Bob says that my graphs remind him of his handwriting, which is quite nice. Morning, Bob. Lovely to have you on board, as always. And wise words from Mr. Singh this morning. Here's the available homes for sale recovering as activity slows. So you can see November last year, when we were right at the peak and we had all of the stamp duty holiday and all that kind of thing, things were really bad right down there. Now it's recovering back to the levels that we probably saw in 2017, 2018. And maybe in 2020. And also widespread repricing is underway. Now this is interesting. If you look at this, so the black dots at the top, where the reduction is 10% or more. The darker purple in the middle is where it's 5 to 10%, and then up to 5% at the bottom. But you can see that in the southeast in particular, and London, that's where you're getting the upward pressure on the higher discounts required than you do. Although in the northeast, they seem to have bucked the trend somewhat. If you look at the northeast column, that's over 10% more. That's probably the biggest area where bigger reductions are being asked. But then they've also had some quite hefty growth in the last year, haven't they? Because we've talked a lot about the northeast being a place where you get some really good value.
It's not just the northeast that's had the hefty growth, Paul. I mean, generally, it's been a hefty growth across the board. I mean, during the pandemic and after the pandemic, the market has been nothing but growth. So all that is happening really is some sort of reality is kicked in, and people thought, well, okay, we've had a whale of a time here. Property's done really well, and naturally it's going to be having a correction. As I've always said, we go normally into neutral and dry, very rarely into reverse. And the only reverse part of this is that the correction is there. So it's just going to stay neutral for a bit longer before we start to get back into drive in I think, sort of probably in the early 6 months, 4 to 6 months of 2023.
Interesting that they say their measure of annual growth in house price inflation has slowed down to 7.8%, but they've only recorded growth of 0.7% since February. So that's really interesting, isn't it? So actually, there's not a lot of growth going on at the moment.
No, and if you look at the growth against the cost of borrowing, the cost of spending, and so forth, it's kind of just steady, because there has been so much more money thrown in at the borrowing side. That's also helped the growth slow down a little bit. And there is a difference, a disparity in the graphs. If you were to look at that against borrowing against what is actually growing in value, it's kind of been steady. And so, yeah, probably 1% or so is probably about right in that case.
So they say 1 in 4 homes has experienced a discount since the 1st of September. 1 in 10, or 11%, has recorded a reduction of over 5%. Price reductions have been greatest, as we said, in the south of England, where sales activity has fallen the most. Those regions, south east and the east of England, of course, have seen almost 1 in 3 homes for sale have their asking price reduced in the hope of attracting more buyer interest. Sales volumes are the key measure that will tell us if these reductions are sufficient in size. So it's definitely the south that's getting the hit, as we would have expected, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the South normally has the highest growth, and of course, it's going to get the same on the reverse side of things. Having said all of that, the North has done exceedingly well over the last few years, and I think, if there's going to be a lot of growth, it's going to happen again in the North and Northeast, generally, because it's affordability that comes into it, and people still want to buy, and if it means that they've got to step a little bit further out in order to be, securing their first step on the run of the ladder, then that's what they're going to do. And I think there will be continuous growth. Midlands and upwards is still seeing plenty of growth happening as we sort of, go into 23.
They're talking about transaction volumes. Transaction volumes matter more really to agents and lenders and builders of houses than they do to actual house prices. But they say the pricing matters more to homeowners and will be purchasers, obviously, as the price of a home is the key part of unlocking the options of a next move. But they do say that drivers and motivations for home moves have shifted significantly and continue to shift since the pandemic. Greater labour market flexibility, rise in retirement. A lot of people decided in the pandemic, I've had enough. I think this will be it for me, and they've just gone and enjoyed their retirement. These factors are now being compounded, they say, by rising living costs. Higher levels of rental inflation are also adding to the cost of living pressures for renters, and we expect this to support first-time buyer demand in 2023. So that's going to be interesting, isn't it? So as soon as those landlords start whacking, as we're going to report in a minute, 20% rises in their rents, they're going to think, well, we might as well buy now.
I think ultimately that's always been a driver to a large extent. When you think that your mortgage could be actually lesser than what your rent's going to be, it becomes really a question of, what the only thing that suffers, and of course, Bob is obviously on board listening, he will say to you that it's the affordability factor that is probably throwing the scenario a little bit out of sync, because they are now utilizing all of the costs of utilities, etc., into the affordability pattern of somebody who wanted to borrow money. And that's why I say that people will probably look further afield in order to compensate for that affordability factor. So I do anticipate that buyers will continue to buy a little bit further out, perhaps, than their normal comfortable zone, primarily to get onto the property ladder, and secondly, to secure a mortgage that they can actually afford in line with all of the costs that are happening, including the utilities that have been thrown into the mix at the moment. We have to remember that one thing that we've always been used to, Paul, has been, and the barometer the government and the people have generally used or the banks have used, is interest rates and, of course, stamp duty. They'll either cut stamp duty, increase it, reduce it, share it, cut it, shred it, do whatever they want to do with it, in order to try and make sure that we kind of still stayed on board. And the Bank of England have always used interest rates as a yardstick to beat us. If we were being naughty people, then of course they increase them so that we actually start to behave like good children. And that's how they do. But all of a sudden, in comes all these other characters: your gas, your electric, your rates, your everything else that comes along, your TV bills, and skies, and God knows, everybody and their uncle are right on the case right now. It's just like those people on striking. If they're not striking one, they knock on the door and say, "Oh, would you fancy a strike as well? Because we'll all might as well strike." And that way we might get them to listen. So they're all using this yardstick of striking at the moment to beat everybody up because they're not getting paid enough. Now, I understand all of that, but unfortunately it's all come as a mix. So you imagine that all that mixing that goes on for Christmas puddings and so forth in the bowl, and you just chuck the whole lot in, and then hoping that you're going to actually create this fantastic recipe of disaster. Well, you're doing a grand job, people out there, for everybody. So, but it won't last. It's just a bit like Christmas. It will only last for the day. We build it up for the whole thing. It lasts for a day, and then it goes flat. So watch this space. We will be back. We will be back. We're not going in. It's like the Arnold Schwarzenegger. He says, we will be back. So property will always come back time and time again. And come early part of next year, these figures and graphs, Paul, you're going to twist them all around and you'll be saying, look what happened now. And,
Mind you, don't forget Boris said hasta la vista, baby, as well. So be careful what you wish for.
Well, he tried to come back. He tried to come back, but then he realised that it was probably the wrong time for his hasta la vista. So he's decided that he'll just stand in the Uxbridge in the next election. And, small steps, Paul, small steps. That's what he's doing.
We shall see. Mortgage rates exceeding 6% have been the primary factor for all the thick pictures on the graph here. But their outlook for 2023, which of course is what most people are interested in, with house prices falling, they reckon will fall about 5% next year. And that assumes mortgage rates will also go back to somewhere between 4 and 5%. And that still looks on track with rates settling in the 4.5 to 5% region. The cost of finance that underpins 5-year fixed rate mortgages, which is used in 6 out of 10 mortgage buyers, that's fallen from 5.5 to 4.1 since early October. So lenders add a margin on top of this rate, of course, to cover the risk and profit, which translates into actual mortgage rates for buyers. This means that a 5-year fixed mortgage rate, they're likely to start 2023 just below 5%. They say this is much better position for the housing market outlook than rates of 6.25, but it will represent a material increase in the buying costs for 7 in 10 households using mortgage finance to buy their property. They expect households to adapt through a range of mechanisms such as changing requirements, injecting more equity, or waiting for house prices and or mortgage rates to fall further over 2023. So looking ahead, they say their expectations for 2023 will remain the same as reported recently, with headline house price falls of around 5%, concentrated in those high-value markets that are most sensitive to higher borrowing costs. They also expect a decline in sales volume over 2023 to 1 million sales. A broader range of needs-based drivers is supporting home moves in the market that has become less reliant on high loan-to-value mortgages, and as an important component of enabling house moves. So basically they're saying that there'll always be those essential moves where someone's job changes or personal circumstances changing. Those contracts will still be realised and properties will sell. But those that are looking to do it because they just want to make a change are going to probably wait a few years and see where they are.
Yeah, I mean, during the pandemic, a lot of people moved, Paul. A lot of people. Look at the statistics. Go back and look at those statistics. There was a lot of movement that happened. So there's going to be a settling time that's come through, and that settling time is just coincided with all this other kerfuffle about rates and utilities. So those that moved are going to settle, not going to shift now. For the average move was always between 5 and 7 years. Every 5 to 7 years, people move. So there's a whole bunch of people that have now moved over the last couple of years who are not going anywhere. So it's only going to be the driver of the first-time buyers, the new investors, the new people that will come into the marketplace. And that will be evolving. It always happens at a given time. Christmas is a great time for people to take stock of their life, and that's what actually happened. Even though it's only for a day, it's amazing what that day can bring for people. And they sit back and think, you know what, I'm going to do this next year. So the old resolution time and these things that happen. So come New Year, there will be changes happening as far as the market's concerned, people. But there will be a number of people who are not going to shift, because a good number of them shifted over the last 2 to 3 years and are going to stay put.
Let's move on to a different topic, and this is an interesting one. The power of the media, of course, and don't believe everything you read in the press, but this is Shelter's headline-grabbing statistics, and everyone's questioning whether these are actually really as real as they suggest. Their press release says that almost 1 million private renters are under threat of eviction. So they're saying equivalent to 941,000 people. That's nearly getting on for 1 million, but let's not get too picky. They're claiming the charity did a poll with YouGov, funded by the Nationwide Building Society, and they found that those at risk of eviction, 504,000 private renters had received or been threatened with an eviction notice in the last month, up 80% on the same period last year, and 482,000 are behind on their rent, putting their home in danger. Record high rents and soaring living costs mean the fear of becoming homeless is looming large over millions of people stuck living in insecure private rentals. Interesting reading, Joe, and quite shocking.
Yes and no. I mean, it's like night and day. It was going to follow. I mean, interest rates have gone up, costs have gone up for landlords. Landlords are going to pass that somewhere else, and of course, it's going to be tenants. Tenants obviously are not in a position to maybe make the same payments. But I think communication is the answer to the problem, really, as the good old song goes. And I think that you've just got to communicate that situation. And I'm sure it wouldn't be as high as figures that they are, but there are scenarios where people are not able to afford. They are, and there are scenarios where people are just don't want to afford it. They just feel, well, why should I pay anymore? And because that's where the evictions start to come in. If they don't communicate and actually work together with their landlord, then the chances of those evictions are going to be higher. And I anticipate that be quite high next year to a large extent if people don't actually communicate with each other and start to say, what you can and what you can't. I can tell you that, I've spoken to clients recently whose mortgages are actually now higher than what the income they're getting from their rental, and so theoretically there becomes an issue in their mind that I'm actually now paying for someone to live in my place as opposed to them wanting to pay to live in it because that's what they want to do. So that mindset changes, and when the mindset changes, of course, people's attitude change. So I think sheltered headline is probably a bit headline grabbing. I mean, I understand that, but then you need these headline grabbings to create the attention that is required. And theoretically, I think they're probably not quite off the mark. They're probably on the mark in the sense that if people don't communicate and work these things out between them, yes, the likelihood of more evictions is very high.
It certainly made the news on ITV in the middle of last week as well. I mean, they actually did a poll of 2,000 people, and they've obviously multiplied this up to represent the whole of the country. So to some extent, there is an element of putting the finger in the air on this. But they also found that a quarter of private renters, equivalent to 2.8 million people, are constantly struggling to pay their rent, an increase of 24% compared to the same period last year. And it's interesting that obviously they're doing it year on year, so they're using a similar sample each time. So the movement perhaps in the figures is more interesting than the actual figure itself. More than two-thirds, 69% of private renters, equivalent to 7.7 million people, would struggle to find a suitable home this winter if they were evicted. And that's a very good point, because if they get evicted, they've got to find somewhere else to live. But of course, those new properties on the market are already going to have a rent rise on them because the fact that the landlord has had to pass those costs on because they're getting increased costs on their mortgages and various other things.
Hence my point of, communication is the answer to the problem. Because at the end of the day, you could be evicted. Yes, it's going to, when an eviction happens, that situation falls in the hands of the local authority. Amazingly enough, the local authority do not have enough housing for those people. They then go and rent rooms in hotels, hostels, and so forth, and pay silly money for those things. So it's actually almost beneficial for them to come to the table. And I find that sometimes, they've got to go through this process. This is the annoying thing about this, Paul. They have to go through this process, right, in order to get an attention, instead of the local authority or whoever's helping them, supporting them, to actually come to the table and say, look, I can offer Mr. XYZ, which will help him because it means they're stable in their job, they're stable in their life, they're stable in their family, they're stable in their home. Stability happens and helps everybody. But because the system says you've got to be thrown out before you can actually go around and say to the local authority, look at me, I'm homeless now. And then what they do is, oh, well, you're homeless. Actually, well, we can put you into a little hostel. You and your family can live in one room somewhere, and that's what we can do. So it's just wrong for them to actually do that. However, it is the system, and there's nothing you can do to buck that trend. The only people who can change that system, of course, are the people that are in authority, and the computer always says no.
The London Renters Union reported in Inside Croydon last week, which is an online publication. They reported that members of their union, and they have 7,000 members, are reporting increases of up to £3,400 a year in their rent, which is a 22% just over 20% rise in the rent costs. And they're basically accusing the estate agencies of saying to landlords, look, here's your opportunity, go and increase your rent. And indeed, if you look at other figures reported this week, one particular agency, Foxtons, reported a 25% increase in their revenues, and they paid their chief executive £1.6 million in the last year. Estate agents are deliberately causing these rent hikes by encouraging landlords to raise rents and encourage bidding wars, says a London Rental Union member. Interesting words.
Yeah, I think that when things are good for somebody, they are bad for another person. This is a business. I'm in business, and so many others. This is a business. It doesn't mean that if somebody else is having a benefit, somebody else can't have a benefit. If landlords are going to have to increase their rents because their mortgage payments are going up, because their bank is making more money, because the government is saying that they've got to charge higher interest rate, it's all going to go down somewhere. Someone's got to pay at the end of it. That's what happens here. And of course, when somebody makes a bit of money and shows that they've shown an increase, or the statistics show an increase, they start saying, oh, well, the agents are the people that are doing it. Agents do not wake up in the morning and go around and say, actually, do you know what? I'm going to phone Paul Allen and say, whack your money up by X, Y, Z, because we can turn around and earn X, Y, Z commission. It's proportionately tiny by comparison to what people actually think it's going to be. And that's what they've got to sort of take on board and take into consideration. But yes, there's always going to be someone who's not going to be happy about somebody else making money. But if they were in that position themselves, they're very quick to make that money themselves.
We've discussed the landlords lot quite a bit, you and I, over the last few months, and it is a sticky place to be these days. There's no doubt about that. The government seems to have it in for landlords, both in a tax perspective and also the quality of their properties. And obviously, the cost of mortgage finance is making it a difficult place to be. Probably one of the reasons why we're seeing such a rise, and we have mentioned this before, on the build-to-rent market. So that's an interesting situation that we find ourselves in. Here's a report that says the value of the UK's build-to-rent market has grown from 35 billion in 2019 to 56 billion, a rise of 60% year on year. This is according to Knight Frank's analysis. The company predicts that sharp growth will continue, with the build-to-rent pipeline estimated to boost the current value to 102 billion by 2028, which will be a rise of 82%. The analysis is contained in their latest annual multi-housing report. According to the firm, 3.2 billion of capital has been committed to the UK's build-to-rent sector during the first 3 quarters of 2022, with a further 650 million expected to trade before the end of the year. Knight Frank say this would take full-year investment to 3.8 billion, 31% higher than 2016 to 2020 long-term average. It's interesting that they say that they have here in the detail 260,000 buy-to-let mortgage redemptions over the last 5 years as private landlords look to exit the market. That's quite a stunning figure. 250,000 buy-to-let mortgages just said, right, paying you back.
Yes, and in that statistic, again, the headline numbers always make the headlines. But in that statistic, you have to take into consideration people that are retired, perhaps coming out of that market, perhaps decided that the leases are too short, want to sell certain things. So there's a whole number of things that are falling into the redemption section. But of course, 250,000 redemptions are a good headline number to show. In the grand scheme, when you look at the overall number of transactions, 250,000 is actually not. It's not even touching the edge as far as I'm concerned. But good point to have. The build-to-rent market undoubtedly is where the future is. There's no question in my mind about that. Interestingly enough, a major high street department store last week announced its first number of build-to-rents that they're going to do, and it's been on the cards for some time. And all these supermarkets and so forth are coming into play, where previously they would have probably just sold off the land and given it to some developer to do. They've actually now beginning to say, well, actually, we're going to build them ourselves and rent them out and make you. So they are unifying their whole thing. What they're going to do there is going to build lots of properties, rent to the people that want rent, and those customers will actually become, sorry, those renters, tenants will become customers of their store. So they're building and shoring up their income in every possible way, and of course making sure that their capital growth on their asset is going to get better. So the build to rent market is undoubtedly happening. And don't forget, in Europe, it has been a build to rent forever. I mean, it is standard practice. Pretty much 90% people there tend to rent as opposed to 90% in the UK that want to buy. It's a complete opposite number that is there. So that trend is beginning to follow in, and more people are looking to rent their future homes, and depending on where they are. Also, the movement of work still is quite strong, even though we're not part of the EU. Movement of work still happens not only between south and north of England, but other parts of the world as well.
According to Knight Frank, 3.2 billion of capital has been committed to the UK's buy-to-rent sector during the first 3 quarters of the year. A further 650 million expected to trade before the end of the year. They say that there are more than 72,000 completed buy-to-rent homes in schemes of 75 units or more across the UK. A further 57,000 units are currently under construction, and an additional 61,000 have full planning permission in place. These numbers bring the total buy-to-rent pipeline to 190,000 homes, excluding sites in pre-planning. According to Knight Frank, some 24% of local authorities now have at least one buy-to-rent scheme open and operational within their jurisdiction. And they say that rentals, whilst high at the moment, will be, they reckon, cheaper than buy-to-let basically when they come back into from 2023 onwards. So they're looking particularly for couples and people sharing. The figures will be even lower for them. So the average renter spent 35% of their pre-tax income on rent in 2022, down from a closer to 40% 5 years previously. For couples and sharers, these figures will be even lower. So they're saying that they will actually be able to make good value rents for people because of the way that these things are constructed.
Absolutely. No, it's just the construction is actually having to be affordable. I mean, if the local authorities, housing associations, and of course big supermarkets all gather and start to build more buy-to-rent properties, it takes the pressure of everybody else, and all these people that are perhaps coming out of the buy-to-let market will actually swing towards the buy-to-rent market, and that's probably what they're counting on. So one way or another, it will find its own balance. And then in the new year, in 23, 24, you will find a new surge of new would-be landlords coming into the marketplace with the prices adjusted and the rental income adjusted. We'll be back on that treadmill towards home ownership and renting, and to the buy-to-let market as well. So I don't see. I mean, it is a glitch that we're going through. I understand it. But I think it will be something that will continue to come back. Just before I finish that point, Paul, just wanted to say to all of our listeners and our viewers and so forth, obviously we've been doing this now for well over 2 years, but Paul and I, and your feedback is immense. But would love your Google reviews, and you can find us on, of course, www.propertymatterstv.co.uk as our page. And there is a lovely little button. You just click on it and go, he's not bad, he's okay. That'll be great. Sorry about that. I had to do that.
Yes, we've forgotten to mention that. Yes, we should mention that more often, definitely. Last point on this, actually, on the build to rent, and then we must wrap up for today. But they say that the areas that are the hottest for investment in build to rent is Norwich, Peterborough, Cambridge, Ipswich, Stevenage, Chelmsford, Watford, and then, interestingly, Oxford, Windsor, Maidenhead, Bracknell Forest, Leatherhead, Woking, Tunbridge Wells, Portsmouth and Exeter. So if you're going to get involved in build to rent, then that's the places that they recommend that you should look at. But the one thing about that is attractive, of course, Joe, to wrap up the final point on this, of course, you don't have to deal with all the leaky taps, as you famously say. You just invest in the project, you've got a professional company running it, and there's perceived to be less risk.
Absolutely, and nothing is worse than having a leaky tap.
And on that bombshell, we should finish today. You can't beat that one. That's the best. We'll see you again next week at the same time for another Property Matters.